Guys, my next guest is one of the best analysts in the game. Add on his amazing UFC run, the fact that he is the PFL head of fighter operations, and just getting started, the one and only, the outlaw, Dan Hardy, is kind enough to join me from the UK before he takes his big trip down to the US. Now, let's talk about UFC 304, man. To start things off, I got to ask you, obviously, I know it's special probably to you every time the UFC goes back to the UK, but what do you think of this start time? Because I spoke to Tom Aspinall recently. I spoke to Dave Lavelle just the other day, and they have sort of differing opinions. For Dave, it's like, hey, changing the time around for Leon, not a problem. We can figure this out. For Tom, he was being brutally honest with me and Casper, and he was like, I don't even know how I'm going to do this, guys. Like, I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, the time is not optimal for me. What do you think about the UFC putting the fight on at that time, especially for the athletes?
I don't think it's ideal, of course. I mean, it's not ideal for anybody, for the fans in attendance, for the atmosphere. I mean, the Manchester fans, the UK fans are going to hold it down. It's going to be wild in there all the way through the night and into the early hours of the morning. But it's not the same as it would be if it was a regular timed event where people are on the way out of the door before midnight. This is going to be fatiguing for a lot of people. Expected to walk out at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. You have to shift all of your training. Veronica and I head over to Renegade, a couple of days a week to go and train and spar over there. Well, Veronica does the training and sparring. And Leon's been absent for a few weeks now because obviously he's training at different times of the day. And that's just generally irritating, especially because, it would be different if you were living in the same time zone that you're going to be competing at. I would even consider doing that. I would have maybe done my training camp in the US on fight time because the influence of the sun and daylight is big on our circadian cycle. So even training at the early hours, you're still never going to feel like you're at your best.
Dude, it's crazy. And also, it's an interesting card as well, right? Because we've got Tom Aspinall, Curtis Blaydes doing it again. Obviously, Tom had the knee injury. We've got Leon Edwards, Belal. That fight finished in an unfortunate fashion with the eye poke. So it's kind of like these two kind of rematches holding down the card. When I talk about Tom Aspinall, Curtis Blaydes first, though, what's your excitement level for this fight personally? And how do you kind of see it going? I guess for a lot of fans, it's a great fight because Curtis Blaydes is a dangerous fighter. But I suppose some of the excitement factor for the casual fans who don't sort of follow the sport isn't quite there with this one.
I'm really interested for this one. Obviously, these there are a few questions to ask around Tom Aspinall. We've seen various different parts of his game. We know how well rounded he is. But if we're breaking mixed martial arts down into three components, if you've got the grappling on the floor, you've got the wrestling in the middle, and then you've got the striking at distance, we know Tom is really good at two assets of that. We know that Curtis Blaydes is very good at the wrestling portion, the middle piece, the bit that holds it all together. And there's no doubt that someone that's got the wrestling experience of Curtis Blaydes is going to be able to have get the better of Tom Aspinall in a straight wrestling match. But this, of course, is not that. I would imagine the comfort blanket, the safety net for Curtis Blaydes is to get this fight to the floor where it feels like he can control it. Because Tom on the feet is going to be a lot quicker than most people that Curtis Blaydes has had to deal with. And I also think one of the factor as well for Tom Aspinall is his ability to strike in the clinch very quickly. Elbows to knees and vice versa when he's defending takedowns are going to be really, really useful for him. It's an interesting test for Tom. I think a lot of people have got their eyes on this as if it's the real heavyweight championship. And the downfall may be partly down to my terrible wrestling, but the stigma around UK fighters is that their wrestling's weak, and this is where Tom gets to prove himself against probably the best in the division right now.
Hey, brother, you never tap to that armbar, so forget wrestling. You got
Yeah,
enough.
but I was
You got enough.
taken down over and over.
Who cares? It's all in the past now. People just remember your awesome knockouts and the fact that you're a tough SOB. So, okay, do you think that Curtis Blaydes is going to be able to get to Tom though, because his striking is so dynamic and his foot movement is so good? Do you think there's a point that Curtis Blaydes gets to him?
Yeah, I think Curtis can make this a very challenging night for Tom. I think Tom's being honest about maybe not feeling 100% at that time of the night, and You know, Curtis trains, if I remember correctly, he still trains in Colorado.
Hmm.
So he's going to be training closer to the time that he's going to be competing. It's going to feel like a more natural time of day for him, especially if, he arrives in the UK middle of fight week, sort of Tuesday of fight week, and then he just stays on his time zone. That's going to make life a lot easier for him. Stay in his hotel room, keep the curtains closed, be very disciplined with his sleep and with his food. And he only has to last a few days to stay on his time zone, and he's going to have an advantage there. And the other thing as well, I think the threat of the wrestling will allow Curtis to stand and trade a little bit more with Tom. I think he's going to test his striking. And I think he'll do that because he knows that if he goes out there and opens up straight away with wrestling, that it's a little bit predictable and Tom will be ready for it. So I expect quite a dynamic performance from Curtis Blaydes. And I do think he's a real problem for any single heavyweight, just purely because he's able to manhandle people if he gets his way. I think we're going to see Tom come through some struggling times in this fight. And I think he's really going to prove his worth as a heavyweight champion.
Mm. Dude, and Tom's such a good guy. Behind the scenes, he's always sending nice messages to us. And like, I know with the fans locally, he's always having a chat with everyone. I feel like the pressure is kind of on Tom in this one. It's like his home soul fight. Everyone's kind of talking about him versus Alex Pereira, him versus Jon Jones. No one's really talking about Curtis Blaydes pulling this off. And sort of putting a little bit of an issue in this process that people have. Do you think he does it, or are you still sort of backing Aspinall here?
No, I think Tom gets it done. I think he's got a diverse skill set, and I think that there are abilities, there are ways that he can threaten in any range of this fight. I do think he's going to come through some adversity, and I do think he's going to get taken down and potentially going to have to work back to his feet, or at least work to get to top position. But I think his neck attacks are going to be a key, and I think his clinch striking. I'm excited for this one. I really am. I think the whole card is good. I just hope we're not affected. Performances are affected because of the time. I would be very sleepy walking out at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
That's right, man. You know who else gets it out, Dan? And that is our friends at Manscaped. That's right. It's that time of the show where we talk about our friends at Manscaped. And you call them what you want, knee knockers, golden nuggets, thigh slappers. But our friends at Manscaped refer to them as the boys. Not every man has children, but every man is responsible for their two boys below the waist. When your little guys have more hair than they need, trust Manscaped for all your grooming needs. Boys need love too, so join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to manscaped.com. Use code word submission, 20% off, free shipping, plus you keep the lights on in this dump. Make sure to go to Manscaped today. And for those wondering, the Lawnmower family is the place to start. You got the Lawnmower 3.0 Plus, the 4.0 Pro, and 5.0 Ultra. 3 ball trimmers, isn't it awesome? Boys need love too, and for this reason, each trimmer is equipped with skin-safe technology, LED spotlight, and unique features for different grooming needs. And don't forget that these babies are waterproof too. Need I say more? For the basic trim, go to the 3.0, work your way up to the 4.0, brother, and the 5 time for the ultimate grooming experience. Take it on the go. Manscaped has you covered. These trimmers come with a travel case and even a travel lock feature to avoid any accidental powering and or weird looks at the airport. Nobody thinking that I'm traveling with my vibrator anymore thanks to what Manscaped. That's right, it's on the cutting edge of cutting pubes. Upgrade your ball trimmer and your life will follow. Make sure 20% off and code word submission today. It'll change your life for the better. Dan's just looking at me like I need to go to New York and you're just ruining my life. So we'll get right back into it. Dan, I got to ask this, man. This heavyweight division. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, I think it's like maybe like Randy Couture might have been champion. We had the interim championship floating around. It's kind of at that period now. But we saw Jon Jones had another issue with the law. What do you make of the division right now? If you had to sort of put money down on it, do you think Jon Jones does his comeback with Stipe? And then do you think we see him fight Aspinall if he beats Curtis Blaydes here?
I think at this stage we'll be lucky if we get Jones versus Miocic, and I think that might be it. I'm kind of ready to draw a line under all of it, to be honest. Like I'm not saying I wouldn't be really interested to watch Jon Jones versus Miocic fight because I'm a big fan of both of them. But I really do at this stage expect Jon Jones to just be able to handle him quite easily. And if Jones sticks around for other fights, there are some more interesting ones here. But I also don't know whether he's in a situation to risk his reputation. Tom Aspinall could really cause him some problems. And I think, John's invested so much in his career. A couple of marquee fights, like the Alex Pereira one. It wouldn't surprise me if we see Jones versus Miocic and then Jones versus Pereira, and we never ever see the Aspinall fight. Um, I'm kind of ready, like I said, just to move on from it. Just make Tom Aspinall the heavyweight champ of the world. Curtis Blaydes is number one contender. We'll have a champion by the end of next weekend. And when Jon Jones comes back, he can fight for, I don't know, the King of Dana's heart or something, whatever you want to call the belt. But it doesn't really matter. It's Jon Jones. It doesn't need to be for a heavyweight title, He's a special fighter. And I just think we need to move on and keep the rankings moving and crown Aspinall as the actual heavyweight champ.
Oh man, you know what though? I feel bad for Aspinall, right? Because I feel like he deserves one of these big marquee matchups. Do you think we see Alex Pereira versus Aspinall at all, or do you think this scenario that you just mentioned, that Jones just fights Aspinall? I mean, Jones just fights Pereira, because if Jones fights Pereira, likely he beats Pereira, right? And then Pereira's kind of done with heavyweight.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is the unfortunate reality of Alex Pereira, and I'm a big fan. I thoroughly enjoy his fights, but I do think he's limited, and I do think that limit definitely will show in the weight class above. Tom would blast through Tom Aspinall. He would be Tom Aspinall. Tom Aspinall would blast through Alex Pereira. He would be on the floor before the bell was finished ringing, and the fight would be over very, very quickly. And Jon Jones is a different creature entirely. He would even play striking with Alex Pereira and find holes in his game, ways to poke holes, and know that he's got that. That he can always get that single leg and put the fight on the floor if he needs to. For me, that's a step too far for Alex Pereira, and I think the UFC will know it as well. And I think that they'll most likely pick and choose their opportunity to move him to heavyweight. And that's why I think we'll see the Jon Jones fight and not the Tom Aspinall one. Because if you lose to Jon Jones, well, he just wasn't ready to fight the greatest of all time. And then he can go back down to light heavyweight and carry on doing what he's doing, while Tom Aspinall is the king at heavyweight. That's the way that I would play it if I was the UFC, if I was the promoter. And I think they see the cards as they've fallen.
Yeah, and I think it's like anytime you can get Jon Jones to come back to do anything, you're gonna go for it, right? Because you get one more fight out of him. Man, when it comes to Jon Jones, is this kind of like the saddest story? This has to be the saddest story in talented championship history when it comes to MMA, right? Like, it be like one of the saddest stories in combat sports history? A guy in his prime like Jones, and now he's 37. It was his birthday the other day, and it's still going, man. It's never ending.
I mean, the truth is, 37 for a heavyweight is not old. He's still got a couple of years where he could be competing, absolutely. And I just hope he's got the motivation to, because he could come back and be the heavyweight king for a couple more years. I do think that a fight against Tom Aspinall would be, his toughest test on the table right now. But I don't know as I go as far as to say it's one of the saddest stories potentially in combat sports. But I still feel like we've seen a lot of Jon Jones. Like Mike Tyson, for example. I don't feel like we saw enough of him when he was in his prime. I think we saw flashes, but they were literal flashes because people were falling left and right to the canvas. Whereas we saw Jon Jones struggle against Gustafsson and have a weird performance against OSP and Dominic Reyes. You know what I mean? Like we've seen quite a spectrum of Jon Jones. So I do feel like we've seen a lot of him already. And if we get a couple more fights, brilliant. And if they're at heavyweight and he has another campaign and adds another level of legacy to his story, then brilliant. But I also feel like he's already achieved a lot, in spite of the fact that he's constantly self-destructive, which is a real shame for all of us as MMA fans, because there are a few people as gifted and as skilled as Jon Jones.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. Tyson, started young. Jones started young. It's hard when you start young and you get that kind of power and you're the baddest man in the world. It's hard to sort of balance out your life like that. Let's talk about Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad, man. You mentioned you're a big fan of the fights. What do you think we'll see from Belal this time around? Obviously, last time the fight got stopped due to eye pokes, we saw that Belal's been training with, Khabib. He's been improving his wrestling. Dave Lavelle told me that they're preparing for a different version of Belal Muhammad versus the first fight that they had. They believe that his wrestling will be a little bit different here. What are you expecting from Belal here? And what do you think is his ultimate game plan to be able to sort of destroy the crowd in the UK and break their hearts and take that title?
I think it's going to be a relentless pace from Belal Muhammad. I think he knows that if he stands on the outside and plays the sharpshooter game with Leon, that it's going to be a long. Well, it's either going to be a long night or a very short night, and it's not going to work out well for him. I think Belal knows that he needs to take a lot of risks in this fight, put pressure on Leon, get inside, force him to defend takedowns. I think we're going to see quite aggressive closing the range from Belal Muhammad just to take the initiative away from Leon. And Leon's, he could be on the back foot for quite a lot of this fight. I think the responsibility is going to be on Leon to get off the fence and make some space to land his strikes. And if he's timid and he's holding back, there is a potential he could get outworked here. It's not going to be a slow-paced fight, though. I don't expect that at all because Belal's been waiting for too long for this opportunity, and he is going to make the most of it. And I expect him to come in supremely conditioned, as will Leon, of course. But it's going to be a real test of the conditioning and the takedown defense of Leon, and kind of similar to Tom Aspinall in the top against Curtis Blaydes. I expect him to really show how strong and how capable he is.
It's interesting that David Lavelle brought up a good point when I spoke to him. He said, Leon's fought Usman, Leon's fought Colby. Like, he's been fighting a lot of these elite wrestlers recently. Ultimately, how do you think he does with Belal when it comes to the clinch work and trying to stop Belal from actually getting anything started when it comes to the wrestling?
Leon's got incredible takedown defense. He's almost systemized and developed his own method. And we've seen him teach portions of it at Renegade and stuff, and it's a really well thought out process that he goes through to leverage his physicality. He's got long levers, he's got a very narrow waist, so he knows he's going to be fighting waist control a lot and single legs and double legs. He's very good at hand fighting and stripping grips. He just needs to be proactive doing it. I think he's got the skills and the knowledge to do it. It's just a case of keeping the fight moving. And I think Belal can, he's going to be the one trying to set the pace of this fight. And Leon's going to want to slow it down and pick him off at a distance. And if, the reality is if Belal falls into that trap and he can't get inside, then he's going to get eaten alive. And Colby got stuck on the outside a lot of that fight because Leon was very good at commanding the space between the two of them. But that's why I expect a very aggressive Belal Muhammad, because I think he knows he needs to just get inside at all costs as quickly as possible.
It's an interesting time in the division, man. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think is next for Leon? Javier Mendez, he's adamant. He wants Islam to move up to welterweight. I guess that weight cut for Islam Makhachev isn't something that's, doable for a really long period of time. Do you think that's the next fight, or would you prefer someone else? And Dave Lavelle mentioned he believes Islam might be a little too undersized for welterweight and for someone like Leon. Do you believe Islam versus Leon is a lot closer than maybe some of Leon's team might think?
I think that's a fight that Leon would welcome, to be honest, because I do feel like Leon thinks that his size and his takedown defense would prevail in that fight. I don't know. You see, Makhachev's one of those kind of fighters. Like I'm sure we've talked about it. I've talked about it a lot. The weight class between lightweight and welterweight, wherever it falls. I'm a fan of 162 because it's right in the middle. I know some people want 165, but like Makhachev's right there. He's maybe not quite big enough to go up to welterweight. I don't know. He might fill out, but that also might change his gas tank. He might not be able to keep the same kind of pace that he does at lightweight. It's an interesting question. There are also a lot of other people at welterweight that you've got to consider, the likes of Ian Carey and Shavkat. People that are on the way up the rankings that are going to be demanding their opportunity soon as well. I wouldn't mind seeing Makhachev stick around at lightweight a little bit longer and allow the welterweight division to kind of, process through some of these prospects that are coming up before we see him cross over.
Last one on Edwards. What do you think about him potentially moving up to middleweight one day in the future? He said he wants to be GSP's record, so it's not going to be like tomorrow. But what do you think his chances would be if he moved up? And I guess he'll be facing the likes of Dricus or Sean Strickland, Rob, or Izzy.
You know, he's a big welterweight, and I feel like he could allow his body to fill out a little bit as well. Just purely based on his frame, he could carry a decent bit more muscle mass. And you look at his brother Fabian Edwards; he's a middleweight, and there's really not a great deal of size difference between the two of them. I certainly think he could handle and move up to middleweight, and I think if he had the right opponent, it would be fascinating. I mean, Leon against Rob Whittaker, someone like that would be fascinating. Even Adesanya would be a really, really good fight. Um, I mean, even a Paulo Costa, someone that's going to come at Leon and make him work. That's really what you need. A fight between him and Adesanya would be like like watching real life Mortal Kombat. I think it would be a fascinating fight. But it would be a case of two samurais in a field. Who draws first is the one that loses their head. But I think there's a lot of interesting fights for Leon at that weight class, and I do think, especially if he does it sensibly, he could move up and be very comfortable and very dangerous at that weight.
Two more guys that love to move forward, Dricus and Sean Strickland as well. So there's a few guys there that are willing just to go at him. Let's just quickly, before we wrap, talk about Paddy Pimblett versus Bobby Green, man, because Pimblett's had this interesting run, right? And I want to get your thoughts on this. He came into the UFC from Cage Warriors, and we were all talking about, hey, maybe this guy's going to make it to the rankings and the title and sort of be the next champion in the UFC. But he took that other route, that kind of Sean O'Malley route, where the belt doesn't really matter and people just want to sort of tune in to see him because he has such a great personality. He mentioned that this could be his last fight because financially, there's bigger fights out there for him when it comes to boxing and other areas. For yourself with PFL, there's money out there outside the UFC now. If this is his last fight against Bobby Green, and let's say he gets it done and he doesn't return back to the UFC for whatever reason, how would you look back on this run that Paddy Pimblett has had with the UFC? And are you surprised about anything, how it played out now that we're sort of potentially towards the end of it?
No, I'm not really surprised, to be honest. Paddy's an interesting one. Following his rise up through Cage Warriors, there was definitely something very special about him. He recruited a different fan base to most of the other fighters that were coming through in Liverpool, and he really kind of led a charge. I know obviously Darren Till was there as well, but Paddy's audience was different. They all got the same haircuts, they've got the same jackets on, and they were all polite young men. They'd go rowdy when he fought, and then they'd tidy everything up afterwards. And he appeals to a different demographic, and they're not. It's a bit like Jake Paul's fan base, if I'm honest. They're not really bothered what he does. They're just interested in him as a person. If he decided he was going to retire from MMA and start a cooking show, he'd do really well. If he would decide he was going to be a football pundit, he would do really well. Just because he's got that likable personality, and people are interested in watching him no matter what he's doing. I think Paddy's got a lot of options on the table. Of course, if he does fight out his UFC contract and look at other promotions, I'm almost certain that there's going to be a lot of money on the table for him. And I try and say that with a straight face. But he's got many different routes that he could take, and lots of different people that would want to work with him as a brand as well. So he might not even need to or want to fight anymore. But there's a lot of different directions Paddy Pimblett can go, and we've just kind of got to get on the Pimblett train and just go along with the journey, because he's a fascinating individual. And let's be honest as well, he's in a shark tank of a division, and you've got to really dedicate your whole life and everything about yourself to chasing that UFC lightweight title, because it's most likely the most difficult division to get to the title. And I think Paddy realizes that the person that he is within the next 5 years could be very, very rich without going through all that hardship and training.
All the dieting. I gotta ask, man, like Bobby Green, obviously, he's a guy who's a veteran. He'll go in there, he'll trash talk with you, but he is very experienced, and he's a little bit smarter in that octagon than his opponents are led to believe. And when they fall into these rhythms or they make a mistake, they have paid for it. We've seen him really sort of get some great wins in the octagon. How do you see this fight playing out between him and Paddy? I guess for Bobby Green, it's like, hey, I'm Bobby Green. I'm going to show up here and do my thing. But for Paddy, if he loses this last fight on his UFC contract, that's going to really make or break whatever he does next, especially whatever the deal will be the UFC might offer him to stay on.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a bit bulletproof in that regard. I don't really think it makes much of a difference whether Paddy wins or loses. I mean, if he goes on a losing streak, then yeah, of course. But losing to someone like Bobby Green, especially if it's a wild fight, which it most likely will be. Paddy's ground game has always been his strongest skill set. His ability to close range and get on people's backs and choke them out. That's going to be really difficult to do against Bobby Green. He is a very, very experienced fighter. I mean, you say veteran. I cornered against Bobby Green it was in California at the Pyramid. And this was when I was fighting in Japan. This was even before my UFC career. And he was dangerous back then. And now he's got all that wisdom and he's still able to compete at a very, very high level. It's challenging because he carries his hands down. So you can't really close distance and try and get to his legs or his midsection very easily, which means that Paddy's going to have to engage his striking. And I know he's been developing his striking, but we've also seen in his fights that he can leave himself open at times. I think this is an interesting challenge for Paddy Pimblett to really show his striking skills and the development that he's been working on, because he's going to have to disguise his closing of the range if he wants to get to the back of Bobby Green. That's not going to be a very easy thing to do, especially in the opening round.
Yeah, man. Well, it's actually, there's a lot of really great fights on there, so I can't wait to see. Obviously, Cape's on there as well. It's going to be a lot of great, interesting fights. I'll let you go because you got to fly out to New York tomorrow morning. But before we wrap up, a couple of things, man. What are a few things coming up from PFL you want everybody to sort of keep their eye open for? Obviously, we've got 3 events coming up that are going to be really awesome. And obviously, Veronica's got her thing going on, so she's killing it. What else is happening in the amazing world of Dan Hardy that we've got to keep an eye on over the next month or so?
Man, well, we're in playoff season right now, so yeah, I'm heading out to New York. We're going to be on the mats at Henzo's again. No fight book yet for Veronica, but we're slowly moving in the direction, ready to start, preparing for something. August is playoffs for the global season, so we'll have 3 events. We've got Nashville, Hollywood, Florida, and then Washington, D.C. Loads of really, really good fights. Heavyweights, women's flyweights, men's featherweights, loads and loads of tough fighters, high-level fights. So I'm looking forward to being at all of those. And then as we creep into September, we've got Bellator, so pretty much full on. Loads of events, loads of fights, loads of good stuff. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, man. I saw there's going to be some Australian PFL news and movement happening as well. What I love about the PFL is, like sometimes you might have an average UFC card, but PFL cards are great because you get to discover a lot of new talent. You get to see guys from back in the day that are still fighting, that still have so many great fights, and there's so much on the line. You guys do an amazing job. And of course, you guys need to follow Dan's YouTube channel for all of his amazing breakdowns. The War Room is one of my favorite shows to watch, and follow Dan on social media at Dan Hardy MMA. Dude, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, man. Always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon.